Hello, everybody. My name is Glenn, and this is another live interview for our Strata Private Facebook group. I am over the moon excited because, as you can see, I've got a companion, a compatriot here today. I actually have my holistic nutritionist today, Christine Moran, and we're going to be interviewing her all about stress and nutrition for stress. We're going to go gangbusters today and talk about it. I'm really excited because she's helped me so much with her services. I'm a client of hers, and I really look forward to talking to her about everything nutrition all the time. Before we get too nitty gritty into it, though, Christine, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Glenn. Thank you. How are you doing?
You can probably tell I'm doing gangbusters. I'm feeling great. It's the
Yay.
word of the day today is just gangbusters. I'm feeling amazing. So thank you so much for coming in today and taking time out of your busy day and running your business full of multiple practitioners to be here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. So before we go too far into it, I know you've been on here before and some people know who you are and what it is you do and a little bit about your story. But for people that don't know you, would you mind spending just a few minutes telling us a little bit about who you are, how you got into nutrition and honestly changing people's lives with nutrition? But not only that, you've got your own business and company. Could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. Again, I'm Christine Moran. I own Harmony House Wellness here in Newmarket. We are an integrated healthcare community where we treat people. We're not necessarily looking at a disease, we're looking at people. And our main goal is to really help people discover underlying goals and help to rebalance their lives. How did I get into this? I started off as a dancer back in when I was a child, which went into my teens, I also developed an eating disorder. And through this eating disorder, this long love-hate relationship with food. There were so many things that I went into, exercising too hard, not eating enough. There were so many things that I ended up doing that really had a huge effect on my health. Through my studies of trying to experience and try to discover, where the missing pieces were, I grew to have this really big love, not just of nutrition, but of science itself, and the effects that nutrition has on the body, and the effects that our lifestyles and our thoughts and our environment really affect our health and how we're able to stay balanced and how we're able to um, function in the world. So it's become my mission to help people really find that balance back in their life again, especially since they've had this imbalance so long in their life. How do we now reverse things and correct things and try to live as optimally as we possibly can?
And I love that because you have a team, which is
Yes.
fantastic, right? At Strata, we do the exercise thing and we all have our own, I guess, unique spin on it. We all kind of try to get people to the same place. You have a whole team of people. I know that you have an osteopath. I know that you do a lot with nutrition yourself. I know that you have an RMT, a psychologist, a whole team there to help with people, which is one of the things I love about what it is y'all are doing over at Harmony House Wellness.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe there really does need to be a village. There needs to be a community to really help support mentally, emotionally, and physically. So we do have a nice community. We do have great support groups. It's all about everybody coming together. There's no one way of doing things. Everybody has their own way. Whether you want to walk, drive, or fly to get to your goals, there's ways of achieving them.
Absolutely. Different modes of transportation.
Absolutely.
So today we're talking all about nutrition and stress, and those things together. If you don't mind, just really, really quickly, so we can agree on definitions for everyone working for the listeners, how would you define stress?
Stress, that's a really good question. Stress itself, this is our reaction, almost, I would
Mm,
say, is reaction to the body. Stress can be fantastic. It's what allows us to survive. It's what allows us to function. It keeps us alive. But too much, like anything else, too much stress can be, or not enough, can be a really big issue happening within our body as well.
absolutely. And so when it comes to stress, and we're talking about stress and nutrition here, I guess like the $1 million question, what everyone wants to know who's going to be watching this live, thank you for joining us and on replay, is how can nutrition help with the response to stress? Or how can nutrition play a role in mitigating stress and managing it?
Absolutely. The first thing to understand is exactly what the stress is and how the body reacts to it. And, stress, again, this is the car that stops in front of us and we instantly slam on the brakes without even thinking about it. This is our stress responses that allow us to do that. Or, we're walking through the woods, we're in a hike and there's a bear in front of us. And, it's our fight or flight. We're either going to fight our way out of this or we're going to go. It's pushing the body and it's a good thing. Um, Too much stress, though, this is something that becomes an issue. And as brilliant as the body is, it doesn't particularly recognize the difference between the car stopping in front of us or the bear in the woods, or we've skipped a meal, or we haven't slept optimally last night, or we worked a night shift, or it doesn't recognize the difference in that stress. So the big issue is where we go back a couple hundred years, where we were out hunting and gathering, and fight or flight really was something that kept us safe and alive. um, Here in especially Ontario, that's not necessarily something that is a regular part. It's something that should react. It should help us get through something, but then it should diminish. And with our environment, we've got Wi-Fi, we've got weather issues, we've got the air and the water, and then we've got food and or the lack of a healthy food or an imbalance of food, skipping meals, eating too many meals, work and computers and right, we all have it. And although we've gotten very, very good at compartmentalizing that stress and being able to adapt to some of that stress, it's still there. I work with some people who have really demanding jobs, and I have no stress in my life, and it's like, how can you not? Right,
It's
and
true.
it's right, and just because we're able to handle it, it doesn't mean that it's not there. And it's a bunch of things that accumulate that happen to us.
Mhm. And so, how does nutrition help us manage stress?
Right. So with nutrition, what we want to do is make sure that we're giving the body the tools that it needs to be able to do what it needs to do. Unfortunately, the more we actually have stress, the less we're able to handle it. So we need to be able to make sure that we're feeding our body exactly what it needs to do, or what it needs to function. We have the right nutrients. We have the optimal nutrients. We're giving our body the foods that are feeding us and not necessarily depleting us. Foods that we're not having this hyper reactivity to. We can control some things in stress and some things we can't. Food's one of those things that we absolutely can support, or we can have, because we're giving our body the nutrients to be able to deal with that stress. And if we get to a point where we're overwhelmed with the amount of stress, our body's not necessarily able to take that step back to be able to reset itself. So nutrition is a really good one to make sure, okay, this is not an additional stress I'm adding to my body. I am getting the nutrients. I am getting the energy that is required to deal with what I have to deal with. And everything is able to go properly.
So it's interesting you say that, because I've been working with you for over a month now, and I've
Yeah.
seen some amazing changes. I've had for the first time in I can't even remember when the last time actually this happened was. I've had 2 nights in a row. You didn't even know this because we haven't talked about it. I have 2 nights in a row of 8+ hours of sleep, which hasn't happened to me in years. Usually I sleep for 6.5, 7 hours, and my body gets me up. Now I feel like I'm really sleeping through the night, which is amazing. And
Fantastic.
yeah, and so one of the things that I think is making a huge difference in terms of my energy and the way I deal with stress, and I'd love if you don't mind talking about it, because I think this is a big thing for a lot of people. It's very in vogue right now, is this idea of missing or skipping meals. When you and
Yes.
I first started working together, I told you, like, I don't eat breakfast. I feel like it slows me down. I feel like I start my day right away. And I was also coming to you reporting that by the time I get to 2 or 3 in the afternoon, I was crashing. And since adding breakfast back in, and obviously the right foods as well, and we can talk about that a little bit later, been feeling better. So if you don't mind, if you don't mind telling me, intermittent fasting, this idea like we eat for 10 hours and then we fast for 14, or it's 4 versus 20 or
Yeah.
whatever that is, you know uh, can this have any positive effects on the body? And conversely, what are some of maybe the negative things that might be happening when it comes to this fasting, and how it might be affecting our stress in our body and the way we feel and have and the energy we have?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. It's a very common one that I'm asked, because intermittent fasting is absolutely huge. And there's lots of ways of doing intermittent fasting, and some are better than others. But when we're looking at this, what we want to do with our food is we want to make sure we're getting enough food to not put our body into a state of stress, but we don't want to give our bodies too much food so we're in this state of stress. We want to be able to give the body exactly what it needs, optimal. So when we're looking at the intermittent fasting, often what people are doing is they're getting up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and they're holding off until lunchtime before they're eating. And by this point, the body has already put itself into that state of stress because we've been fasting all night long. We haven't had anything to eat. Our body has worked really, really hard while we're sleeping. And now it needs to be replenished. And we don't have, we're not giving our body that ability to do that. Whereas I do agree the body needs that ability to fast. It needs that ability to have some downtime. By skipping that morning meal, by the time we do have our first meal, we've already put ourselves into that place where the body's like, okay, I'm stressed out. I need to get that food in there, and we're not always making the best choices. And I think about something the story I hear a lot, and I've gone through it myself as well. You get up in the morning, you don't eat breakfast. It doesn't come naturally to me either. It's something that I really have to make a conscious effort and prepare for. Um, you skip your breakfast, lunchtime comes along, I'm too busy with work, so I'm going to skip lunch. I work through my lunch, all of a sudden it's after work and I'm tired and I'm absolutely famished, so I'm going to stop by, I'm going to grab something to eat, I'm going to snack, I'll snack while I'm making dinner, I eat my dinner, and then I'm going to have maybe some fruit afterwards, and then maybe some popcorn and some chocolate chip cookies and maybe some nuts and seeds, and next thing you know, it's 10 o'clock at night, and we're still sitting here going, okay, I'm still eating. And we have that whole binge that's happening from dinner and on. And there's different ways of doing the fasting, but I think the important thing is that we're getting those 3 meals a day in. We're giving the body to actually deal and metabolize that food and do what it needs to do so that the hormones can do their functions and then lay off, because the other hormones need to be able to do what they're doing. And as long as the body is able to go through the whole process of taking our foods and breaking it down and putting it where it needs to be, we're ready now then for the next meal as we go along. And then at nighttime when we're fasting, and if we stop eating 2 to 4 hours before we go to bed, we've got that whole night to be able to do that fast and then to have a balanced meal in the morning.
Yeah, so it's interesting because for me, I was always fasting for the past 8 years. And one of the conversations that you and I had at the very beginning when we started working together was like, Christine, I really am attached to this fasting thing. I feel like it really works for me. I want to, excuse me, I don't really want to let go of that. And you're like, well, just try it on. Let's see how it goes. I'm like, okay, great. You know what? Like, there's no harm in trying this for a little bit. And what I had found was that, at least for me, that by the time I did get to 12, I was stressed out. And I really did feel that having those nutrients and getting them first thing in the morning was really, really good for me in terms of keeping my energy where it needed to be until lunch, and then lunch keep my energy until where it needed to be for dinner, and then having my dinner satiate me enough so that by the time it was time for me to go to bed, I wasn't hungry. And then I still had that overnight fast. I don't know if a lot of people think about it like this, but one of the big things that came up for me was like, oh, if I have my last meal at 6:37, which is now what I do, and I'm usually asleep by 10, and I sleep for like 8 to 10 hours, sorry, like 7 to 8 hours, I'm still, in a way, if I go from 7 to like maybe 7, whatever that is, that's still a good 12 hours I'm
Exactly.
fasting. That's still like half of the day that I'm still quote unquote fasting. And I think a lot of people, and I could be wrong, a lot of people end up getting into intermittent fasting for like one of two reasons. From when I've seen, it's either people who want to be able to eat large amounts of food at one time and not have to worry about it, which was me. And that isn't, I think when there's like an emotional attachment to it, like I
Yeah.
want to eat large amounts of food, that's not a healthy thing. And that's been huge for me to improve. And the other thing, and I don't know how this fits in, but I think there are other people who probably carry more body fat mass, and maybe they can get away with longer periods of fasting because they have all that extra energy stored up. But even then, if I'm not mistaken, even those people can experience some kind of crash, or if they do get really hungry, have those binging moments where they just want to go hog wild on white rice for lunch, and all of a sudden, it's still 3 o'clock and they feel tired.
Absolutely. When we're in a state of stress, this puts us in that fight or flight kind of position. So, in that fight or flight, our body is preparing to do exactly that. We either, we want to run or we're going to fight. Obviously, we're not doing that. We're sitting at the computer doing our taxes. So, we're not using that energy. but it's still trying to gather that energy there. And our body can only handle so many carbs and so much protein at any given time. Anything other than that really gets stored, um, usually as fat. And we have unlimited fat stores. So this is really where it goes. And yes, we can use those reserves, but we have a great capability of storing food. We are not overly designed to be letting that go, because even fast weight loss can be a form of stress on the body. The body is really not designed to be letting all of that going. It wants to keep that storage for when it's necessary. If we're always in that position, we're always we're getting that gain, we're getting everything going. It's a hormonal imbalance that we end up developing, and that can be a lot more challenging to have to try and rebalance again, but totally doable.
Yeah, and I understand what you mean about like the hormonal rebalancing, and I think for a lot of people, maybe that can be like some people can be it could be like a jargony or buzzword. When you say hormonal rebalancing, what kind of stuff are you talking about here, and how might it impact our stress?
Yeah, the two big hormones that we really think about when we think about a stress is our glucose, our blood sugar, um, or insulin. Really is where I want to go with that, is insulin and cortisol.
Mhm.
In order to, we're stressed out, what the body's going to do is we've got the two big stress hormones, adrenaline, which gives you that immediate reaction, and then the cortisol, which allows you to keep up the momentum and keep it going. And the cortisol is something that we have an issue with, because it really only is designed to get us through the situation and then go off. But if we're always in that state of stress, we're working, we have family, we have kids, we have, we're especially in North America, we're US, Canada, we're in that state where we shouldn't have downtime. We shouldn't take some time. If you're not doing something, there's a problem. You're thought of as lazy, you're thought of, there's issues there. We need to have that downtime. The other one would be insulin, because the cortisol, what it's doing is telling the insulin, bring the glucose to feed the cells. And if we're not getting enough, or we're having too much, well, now that's a new stress, and that's triggering even more cortisol. So it's this catch 22 that just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. In order to deal with stress, one of the big things we need to do is get a handle of that cortisol insulin balance.
And so with all that in mind, how does maybe like starting to like rebalance these hormones in terms of making sure there's being secreted in the right amounts, how does that end up affecting our hunger?
There's four hormones actually that have a lot to do with hunger. And with those ones, those are the two bases, the insulin and the cortisol. But then we start looking at ghrelin, we start looking at leptin, and these are the hormones that tell us we're either hungry or we're not hungry. It's time to eat or we're full. And they give us that. So when we have that hormonal imbalance, it's kind of like this domino effect that starts going. So you'll often hear people say, I'm eating and eating and I'm eating. I think about, shows like My 600-Pound Life, where you're often hearing people who are talking about, I keep eating. You see them, they're eating all day long, but they're telling you, I'm never full. And this is
Mm.
that hormonal balance that's, that hormone's not there to trigger them to say, you've had enough, you're full, you're done. And the opposite can happen as well, where, these people who are like, I'm never hungry, that is just as much of a hormonal imbalance there itself. If you're going all day or days without eating and having, a history of anorexia, yes, that absolutely happens. I was able to go for days and days and days and days without having that hunger, and it was something I needed to have something to trigger me to eat, and it shouldn't be a visible cue. You should be ready to eat. So it's just as much of a hormonal imbalance to never be hungry as it is to always be hungry.
So I'm loving this so far, and like I get to like selfishly like learn more too, because I know I ask you all these kind of questions, and we actually had one of our meetings yesterday, and I was like, okay, I'm going to save some of my questions for the interview tomorrow because I know they're going to come up. So with all this in mind, I want to talk a little bit about healthy foods and stress, because one of the things that I've learned through you is that some of the foods I thought were really healthy could actually be detrimental to my health. Things like cow's milk, perhaps, or even a certain type of food like a banana, for example. We're often told like, hey, get your fruits and vegetables every day. These are the things that you need to eat. And I'm sure there's a truism to the idea that we have to eat fruits and vegetables because we need them for their nutrients and how they help with our hormones and all that stuff that you've already talked about. But
Mhm.
can some of these, and I use the term in like in quotations, healthy foods actually be detrimental to our health? And like, how might that play a role in our stress?
Absolutely, it can. You know, we have a textbook. This is our guideline about how the body needs to function. Unfortunately, we're people. We're not textbooks. We have different lives. We have different, you know, biology. We have different needs. So there's a lot of things that are different between each person. And this is where I get really, really passionate, is really discovering what is it that the body really, really needs in order to function. Because you could have the most amazing foods. I know some people who eat the exact same thing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day, and they're healthy, whole foods. And this is exactly what we tell people: is we want you to eat, you know, foods that have come out of the ground, foods that, you know, we want live, healthy food to give us our nourishment. But if it is something that doesn't necessarily work for you, some people genetically don't have the ability to deal with certain foods, and some people have a greater ability to metabolize certain foods than they do other ones and utilize them. And some people have to work a lot harder for them. Or if we're having the same thing all the time, we're missing out on a lot of valuable nutrients. So it's really figuring out exactly what it is. You could have kale every day of your life. You're told it's a superfood. It's great to go. But if you don't need that kale, and now you're not getting other things that you do require, this can create those imbalances. We want to make sure we're trying to get that balance within the body. And that imbalance, again, is a form of stress on the body.
And I think you may have told me this or heard it somewhere, and I hope I'm doing its due diligence. Is that often like our health and how we manage and deal with stress can be limited to whatever that key nutrient is that we might not be getting. And if we're eating a lot of the same foods over and over again, and we're not getting the nutrient we need, we could be bad news bears. Likewise, I think, and this is what came down to the conversation we had yesterday, which is if you're getting too much of a nutrient, that can also throw some stuff out of whack.
Right,
I know, for
exactly.
example, if I'm not mistaken, you correct me if I'm wrong, potassium is a necessary nutrient in like water
Absolutely.
balance in the body. And if we're dehydrated, right, we might feel more lethargic, tired, and that can be stressful. Am I on the right track so far?
Oh, 100%,
Yeah.
100%. We can only live so long without hydration. Yes.
And so if someone is having, for example, like myself, too much potassium in their diet, that could actually affect how much water they're able to pull into themselves and how hydrated they are, thus affecting their energy and how they feel and deal with stress. Is that also true, or did I miss the mark on that one? I'm
No,
happy
you're
to be
absolutely
wrong.
no, you're absolutely
Yeah.
right. And definitely that could be something that's an issue, and it's not something that, you know, always stands out and says, "Hey, look at me. This is what the issue is." This could be something, by doing a little bit of digging, that we can find those imbalances, and they're easily fixed. And diet can definitely have an issue. Illnesses can have an effect on things. Medications can have an effect on it. Your environment can have an effect on it. There's so many different things. You know, the first thing that pops up into my mind are people who are taking collagen to help with skin health. But if your vitamin D is low, or your vitamin K is low, or your iron is low, actually, even more so, we need these to help with the absorption and metabolism. Without the collagen is really not going to do anything. And this happens with a lot of things. The potassium, if it's too high, yes, it can have an effect on how well the potassium helps to keep um, your hydration outside of the cells, and this can create inflammation. This can create swelling throughout the body. This can create a lot of imbalances that are happening throughout the body, that the body has to work really hard to reverse. And you know, it's not going where it needs to be, and when it's in other places, it creates other issues that are happening.
And so this is one of the reasons why I really liked the program that you and I decided on for me to get started, which was the Metabolic Balance program. And if you don't mind, I'm going to speak to it for a second, because as a layperson who's was new to it, I feel like I could probably speak well to it. This program was for me a game changer, because what it did was using actual markers. Like we looked at my blood work, and we found, based on my blood work and where I am, the nutrients that were out of balance. Like, for example, I had way too much potassium in my bloodstream, and that was having some negative effects on like my energy and my health. And how I was dealing with stress. We went and we figured out which foods to mitigate from my diet and which ones to add in to start bringing me back to center. Now that's one small piece, but there
Yeah.
were hundreds of, I think, markers on this blood work that we did, and you use all of them to figure out, hey, Glenn, this is where you need to be eating right now, just to get started before we break you out into like a more easier, more relaxed kind of way of eating. And so I've been now doing this with you for, I think, 3, almost 4 weeks at this point, and my energy's better. Like my skin is, I didn't even know my skin was an issue, and like my skin is cleared up. It's been absolutely amazing. My energy feels fantastic. And so one of the things I love about working with you and the way we've been looking at like stress and my hormones is that we're actually addressing what I need, based on a whole bunch of different metrics, some stuff subjective and a lot of it objective, scientifically based on what I'm eating based on my blood work. I know there's more to come, but I think that's absolutely fantastic. And I really appreciate that you were talking about how like even these healthy foods can even have a negative detriment if we're not getting the stuff that we need. The last time I checked, the number of people who are vitamin D deficient in North America, something like 70% or something like
Especially in
that,
Canada.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we don't get a lot of sunlight. So people are taking all these supplements and they might even do anything for them. And they're blowing hundreds of dollars a month on stuff they could just not be getting any benefit from.
Absolutely. We often hear, people commenting about how you're flushing your money down the toilet when it comes to supplements, and I think that that's really a big part of it. You're not alone, right? It's such a
Yeah.
common. I've done it as well. As I've mentioned, I've got a cupboard full of supplements that I have 5 missing from each bottle. It's supplements are something that they should be something that supplements your diet. Yeah, the more you can get from food, the better. We need to chew our food because that puts enzymes into our food. We need to be able to break down our foods because that gets things running, and if, it's use it or lose it type of thing. So we need to get that in there. And again, if we're not absorbing, you can take all the supplements you want, but if you've got gut issues and you're not absorbing any of those supplements, you're still not getting those nutrients. You can eat all the foods you want, but you're not getting the nutrients you need. And that is totally stress on the body. And like I said, there's stress you can control and there's some you can't. So food is one of those things you do have full control over. And supplements should be something that you can add in there, whether it be as a crutch while your body rebalances itself, or because you don't have a gallbladder, you don't physically have the ability to do something, and the supplements will be there to help balance you. You're taking a medication, you can't stop taking that medication or choose not to stop taking that medication. Medications have side effects as well. So how do we balance the body and support the body to deal with the medication that's happening as well? So there's a lot of things that we need to do, and whether it would be instead of or as in conjunction with, there's a lot that we can do to help support the body to help us to be able to deal with stress. The more we have stress, the less we're able to deal with it. So supplements like adrenal supports to help us um, be able to deal with that stress. We've had those moments where we have a big blow up and we're like, "Oh, why did I react like that? It really wasn't a big deal."
Mm.
And it's a pretty good indication. And then health wise as well, there are medical things, the longer we have high cortisol, we can start developing, physiological imbalances as well that continue, like Cushing's disease, Cushing's syndrome, for example, which is a medical um, issue where we've had these elevated stress and now we're just pumping out way too much cortisol and we just can't deal with it.
So I love what everything you've said so far. And like one big takeaway that I've gotten from this conversation is one of the beautiful things about food and nutrients is that it's not necessarily something that you have to be using in reaction to feeling stressed, even though you can. I think you mentioned supplementally that might be a route to take, but really making sure that your nutrition is on point and where it needs to be creates
Yes,
a more robust environment so that when these stressful events do happen, we can deal with them far better, have episodes
absolutely.
that last a far shorter amount of time. And I mean, something else I think you touched on as well was like when we have the right environment, we tend to have less like inflammation running through the body, which is just
Yes.
like, stuff that doesn't bode well inside all of our cells. And that in turn can have effects on disease or the way we feel energetically. So really, at least for me, at least this was my experience, even just outside of this conversation, is that when you get your nutrition dialed in and what's best for you, it has a tremendous impact on just how you feel day to day, which is another way of saying like getting ahead of stress.
Yes, yes. I often compare our bodies to a vehicle, because if we don't have the right gas in our car, it's not going to function properly. If we don't have the right oils in our car, it's not going to function properly. If our batteries are not optimized, it's not going to run properly. And right down to the shock absorbers, our adrenals, our stress, our fight or flight, these are our shock absorbers. And if we've got too much weight in that vehicle, the shock absorbers are not going to be overly effective. And that happens with our body as well. If we have too much weight in the form of stress, it's one less thing that we can have. That we can control is our food, our nutrients, and making sure. And there's no one way of doing it.
Absolutely, 100% agree. Just so people can take away some practical tips, and then we'll get into a few rapid fire questions. You still have a few
Yeah,
more minutes?
absolutely.
Beautiful. So if you could give people a couple takeaways, like three big takeaways in terms of stuff they could do to help manage their stress via nutrition, I'd love to hear them. I mean, I know the caveat right away will be, well, everyone's different, right? Like that kind of
Yes.
goes without saying at this point. Everything needs to be per person. But if there are some maybe general supplements that people can take if they are feeling really, really stressed, or they're having a bout of that, or other practical advice you can give people that just want to start moving in the right direction, what are some things you would suggest?
When it comes to food, 80-20. It's not all or nothing. It's not, really looking at our foods and looking at what's nourishing your body and what's depleting your body, and really trying to avoid or minimize what's depleting your body, the sugars, the bad fats, the processed foods, and sticking to as much of a whole food diet that we possibly can. This is definitely going to be our first step. When we look at all the diets, that's the one thing it has in common: our whole foods. The more we can get back to that, the more the body's going to be able to rebalance itself and just function optimally. With supplements, there are so many supplements that we can use, that can be beneficial. Vitamin D, as you mentioned, can be one of them. Um, you can you can have too much vitamin D, so again, you want to make sure it's the optimal level for yourself. There's really good adrenal support formulas that are out there as well to really give you, to help keep things balanced. Um, those would be the two really big ones. When it comes to eating, eat within an hour of getting up, eat every 4 to 5 hours throughout the day, and stop eating 2 to 4 hours before you go to bed, and really give yourself
Mm,
that chance to recover. The last one would be, and it's not food related, but sleep. Make sure you're
mhm.
getting that sleep, because that lack of sleep just destroys everything.
Absolutely. Are there any so you mentioned there's some good supplemental formulas. Is there any particular brands or formulas you really like?
There are some really good ones. Genestra has a really good one. It's hard for me to be able to do a particular brand without knowing a medical history. So
Fair
as
enough.
that's what I would say with that. Um, Genestra has some really good formulas. There are really good ones. If you go to your local health food store, they'll definitely be able to recommend some formulas for you, or even better, see a naturopath, see a nutritionist, someone who will get that medical history, that health history from you, learn about you and any medications you're on and anything. At the health food store, they're really good at being able to do that, but they don't really have the time to sit down and get to know everything about you. So to make sure that you're not going to be hurt or taking something unnecessarily, I would definitely recommend sitting down with a naturopath or a nutritionist, to go over that, get something more
Absolutely.
specific for you.
Absolutely. And Christine is obviously a registered holistic nutritionist. I know Dr. Perry is the naturopath there at Harmony House as well,
Yep,
who I've spoken to myself. Wonderful woman. I can't say enough good things about both of you. Let's do a couple rapid fire questions here. You ready to go?
sure.
Okay, fantastic. So, first rapid fire question is, if you could go back in time and meet one person, dead or alive, who would you go back and meet?
That would be really interesting. Um,
Rapid
If
fire,
I could
Christine.
go, yeah, no, sorry, yeah, if I could go back, I'm trying to think of a political way of saying it. Honestly, if I could go back, the one person that I would meet would be Jesus, just
Cool.
because there are so many stories, there are so many beliefs, there are so many everything that goes around it. I would love to be able to sit down with the actual man,
Yeah.
and talk. Yes,
100%. Yes. I mean, like someone who's touched so many people and still lives on to this day. Absolutely. Like, be very,
yeah,
very curious, right? Anyone who's touched that many people for sure.
absolutely.
Oh, okay. Question number two. If you could only watch one movie for the rest of your life, what movie would it be?
um, uh, Pretty much any musical.
Fair enough. Pick one. Favorite musical.
Chicago.
Fantastic. What is something that you're fascinated with right now?
uh Energy, mind body connection, really getting down to the soul, getting down to the nitty gritty. actually, even when I look at the book I'm reading right now, Anatomy of the Spirit, really understanding how our energy works in our body. That's something that fascinates me, that the connection between our physiology and our minds.
Fantastic. And last rapid fire question. Um, what is one thing that you love that you find most people don't?
um, Cilantro.
Okay, fair enough. You know what? That's a very polarizing. No, it's a very polarizing herb. It's a love it or hate it. I get it. I
It
get where you're
is.
coming from.
It is.
So, Christine, before we let you go, and I'm so deeply appreciative for you coming in today, could you tell everyone a little bit about where they can find you?
You could find me at Harmony House Wellness. We're located at 227 Eagle Street in Newmarket, just east of Yonge. We are available in office. We're also available um, online as well as over the phone if necessary, but we can do virtual or in-person meetings.
Fantastic. Everybody, highly recommend going to see Christine Moran at Harmony House. She is my nutritionist. She's my go-to for everything nutrition. Again, my skin's cleared up. I feel amazing. I got so much energy. I'm sleeping better. And it's only been a couple weeks. It has been one of the best investments in my health I've ever made. And I mean that with every single part of my heart. Christine, thank you so much again for coming in today. Really appreciate your time as usual. And I do encourage anyone, if you're thinking about even just having an inkling of a thought like maybe I should speak to a nutritionist, this is the person you want to speak to, especially in the Newmarket area. If you can only get on Zoom, that's great too. She's going to change your world. Christine, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a fantastic day, Glenn.
Everybody,
and everybody.
And yeah, I was going to say, everybody have a wonderful day. This has been another Strata Live interview, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.